Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, that's really a brilliant strategy. You have this idea that you want to get out into the world. You have this worldview that you want to achieve. You control the leaders of the people on the ground. Then they do something, but what's reported is reported by the media, who you also control. And that narrative then translates back down to the people who are actually on the ground doing what they're doing.
There are even journalism watchdogs, like the Columbia Journalism Review, that Soros is linked to and he gives money to. So even the watchdogs of the journalists are in many cases Soros funded.
Can you give us some concrete examples? How is it specifically that George Soros has so many of people that are linked to him inside of the media? Can you give us like a few concrete examples of how that plays out? Let's say like within the New York Times, you said that there are people linked to George Soros. What does that actually look like?
It would just be, so we have, okay, suppose I'm on an Open Society Foundation board, or I'm on a board of a company that gets the majority of its funding from the Open Society Foundation. I then also have either currently or at some point later in my life, then go work for CNN or CBS. So it's just, I've taken Soros money before, either currently or in the past. Now I work for media, and it's inevitable they're going to be reporting on this guy. It's sort of like, and Glenn Greenwald, I think, or actually, I might even know Chomsky, ironically, who obviously I'm not a fan of, but he made the point, like in media, when the media is dictating control, it doesn't have to be me going, hey, you work for me, you say this. It's you respond to incentives. If you work at a publication, they might not tell you what to report, but you might just notice, okay, people who report on these issues get promoted and people who report on these kind of get sidelined. Similar thing there. It's sort of an implied contract where I've gotten money from this guy before. Am I really going to badmouth him in my report? And a lot of people just, choose not to. Plus, they're ideologically benefit from portraying him as just a right-wing boogeyman. Because, if you can dismiss any of his funding as that, then you don't have to really address it. And that happens to me with the book, too. It's just you're promoting a boogeyman, and I'm going, well, I have the list here, but, they don't want to listen.
Yeah, one example that I thought you gave in the book that elucidated this point quite well is ProPublica.
Oh, yeah, I could go on that if you want. Yeah, so they did a very lengthy report on billionaires not paying taxes. And to be fair, it was kind of a BS report. It was just, hey, they have a ton of stock, the stock went up, they didn't pay tax on it. Well, they don't pay tax until they sell. So you can build in a deferred tax into their net worth. But what was interesting about the report is you read every person. You got Bill Gates, you got Zuckerberg, you got Bezos. A couple thousand words, at least more than 500 words per person, very in-depth. Here's what they own, here's why not. You get to George Soros, and there's like one full paragraph, then like a 2 or 3 sentence paragraph. The first paragraph is saying, okay, he paid no tax from these years. However, his representative, and I don't recall him having representatives reach out from the other people, but his did, says, oh, we didn't make money because we didn't pay taxes because our fund didn't make any money that year. Now, Soros' fund is big enough. If you make more than $100 million a year, if you manage more than $100 million, you have to report with the SEC. So anyone can just look up his profit and loss, and he turned a profit those years. So they didn't even do, I'm sure they did do the due diligence, but didn't report it. But they made no mention of the fact that that excuse was a lie. The real reason was, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, he donated 18 or 19 billion to himself, and that gave him a write-off for 5 years. So he didn't have to pay any tax, but they didn't, I guess, want to admit that.
And how was ProPublica, who reported this story, connected to George Soros?
Oh, yes, so he accounts for about 2% of their funding, and they've actually dismissed allegations that he plays any role by going, well, he only controls 2% of our funding, and well, apparently that's a significant amount, enough to change their coverage and not to do basic due diligence. So.
Well, 2% of a
company, I guess, yeah, if you had 2% of McDonald's, you'd have quite a bit of influence. So if it's anything really.
So we talked about the Open Society in regards to media. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Open Society in regards to politicians and political campaigns. So there's been a lot of talk recently about George Soros DAs, right? Can you lay that out? Why? Well, first of all, which cities did he install DAs? What does him installing DAs look like? And then furthermore, why is he targeting DAs?
Actually, I'll start with the reason why he's targeting them. And it's really the easiest way to get policy reform done, because if you want, let's say, less bail, more lenient sentencing, you want these crimes prosecuted and these not, to do that through legislation is quite a process. You have to do everything individually. You're going to get a lot of opposition. If you elect a DA, they have total autonomy on all those things. So it's just, hey, I want the law changed. I back a guy who wants to change it exactly the way I do. He goes in, he changes it overnight. So one of the weirdest things actually about this whole DA thing is these prosecutors are household names. In a country where most people don't even know their representative, sadly enough, or their mayor, but they know who Chesa Boudin is in San Francisco, or Amiris Ayala in Florida, with the McCloskeys, the family that had the iconic photo of them with the guns. Rachel Rollins in Massachusetts, who is, I don't think she's as well known, but trust me, completely insane. Kim Fox in Chicago with, notably got the Jesse Smollett charge dropped, and then, that went from there. But the whole chapter, I make it like almost like baseball stats, where I just have, here's the guy, here's how much money they got, here's what they campaigned on, and here's the results. And it's really the same story in every case, except maybe one I found was just an anti-death penalty guy, but not otherwise radical. But everyone else was radical in a very much a similar vein, a similar theme. So Soros, in presidential elections, he donates hundreds of millions, but there's billions of dollars being spent, so it's harder to move the needle. But when you're in a DA race and there's a couple $100,000 spent in each person normally, and then you drop $1 or $2 million, it actually does. You actually can buy an election that way, and it's happened time and time again. In fact, there are cases where the challenger just drops out because they know there's no point. But it's so. For instance, like Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, the weekend of crime philosophy, it's always misrepresented as, well, hey, we don't want people to go to jail for smoking pot, or hey, some people need mental health treatment, or hey, people might be feeding their families, so we don't put them in jail. And some of it may sound good on paper, but it's just in practice, that's not what happens. In practice, we see cases where clearly violent and mentally ill people will not even face bail. These people are places are doing out with bail entirely, and then they just go out and reoffend. Or in many cases in San Francisco have gone on and killed people. In fact, the entirety of the spike in hate crimes against Asians is attributable to Chesa Boudin's policies. And in many cases, it's a very concentrated problem of these repeat offenders who they will not put in jail, just doing it again and again and again. And it seems like he's probably going to be one of the first to get recalled, fortunately. So that's one notable example. Kim Gardner's another one where we have a case where Black Lives Matter activists break into a gated community, so they broke the law doing that. They're threatening to murder this couple as they're outside their house. They grab guns, which I don't even know if they were loaded or operational. I can't remember that detail. But a very common theme of these activists is they view criminals as the real victims. You'll see this on a social media post. Someone's robbing a Chanel store, and some liberals going, "Well, they might be feeding their family." And I'm going, "With that? Sorry, guys, I don't buy it in that case. If they're stealing bread, I might buy it." But that's one of the things where the victims themselves become the criminals. And one thing that comes to mind recently was there was this viral video of a woman getting attacked in the New York subway, and people were saying, well, why isn't anyone going to help? Was it like a death of masculinity? And I'm saying, well, that could be a role, but it could also be the case that if you intervene, somehow you're portrayed as the bad guy. You're the one who faces consequences. There are countries like the UK where if you defend yourself with even a toy gun, if someone breaks into your house, you'll also be charged. So it's a breakdown of law and order we're seeing, and almost every single one of these cities, and defund the police has been very big with these people. We've seen pretty much a doubling in crime just in 2020 through 2021. There's really no sign of things slowing down. And then all these little quality of life things that you don't even really think about, just not having a homeless camp outside of your home, not having graffiti everywhere, not having public drunkenness. These things are just becoming more and more common and more accepted, and then the activists just dismiss it as, oh, well, this is proof we need more housing shelters. Every negative consequence they create is reframed as, here's why we need to do some left-wing policies. We see this in San Francisco, where they don't build any houses, and then so they have all these homeless people, and they go, well, we need to build more public housing, where it's going to cost them like $1 million per person. And it's just their own policies perpetuate the need for more of the same policies that do nothing.
Let me ask you this. So as you were going through all those examples, I wonder, because George Soros is not, and I'm sure Alexander Soros, they're not dumb people.
No, he's a very smart guy, which is unfortunate for us.
He can see these effects. He can see what's happening on the ground, and yet he continues to push in this direction. Do you think that and so I guess my question is twofold. One is, does he not care, for one? Or two, is the goal the chaos, so that out of the chaos, something new can emerge and replace the system of the U.S.? I
think that's it. I've been trying to speculate overall what's the goal of the defund the police movement, because one of the things I've noticed, and I'm surprised this hasn't been reported more, is that a lot of these places that defunded the police have at least partially refunded them in recent years, but they've done so quietly. They haven't mentioned it at all. So it's they want to accommodate activists by doing something crazy. They realize it's insane, this can't go on, and then they refund it quietly. So they know something's up. So I'm going, so why are politicians still pushing it? And one theory, and I don't know if this ties with Soros in particular, but one theory for why they would push to fund the police is an effort to federalize the police, to give states less autonomy. And in fact, there was recently an anti-lynching bill that sort of served that goal, where lynchings are now federal crimes. And there were liberals talking about it as if lynching was legal up until that point. And it's like, no, we have laws against murder that falls into that category. It's a state offense. You know, there's no need to make it more than it is. But one of the consequences is it does make it federal. And I'm wondering, is that the goal with everything else? Just federalize the police, give less autonomy to the states. It would be the more globalist thing to do. I mean, that is... you know, we're almost a mini EU where the federal government's our EU and we're our own little sovereign states to some extent, and that's antithetical, even that, to Soros' philosophy.
Well, actually, when you were talking about federalizing the police, I think that ties in well to another topic that I wanted to discuss, which is the federalization of elections. Because George Soros also funded quite a bit into the 2020 election with the changing of all the different policies. Can you talk a bit about that? Can you set the stage for the audience about what he was pushing in 2020?
Well, a lot of what he was pushing, and is obviously COVID helped a lot, was the whole vote by mail initiatives. And I think, I mean, it obviously made it way more susceptible to fraud. I saw the Dinesh D'Souza film. But even if you weren't planning fraud, it is just intuitive that it would give liberals a boost. Because, I mean, what do we know about young people? One, they're very liberal overall. B, they don't vote. So it's, you know, the most, you know, the sort of, if you look at people throughout their lives, they become more right-wing over as they get older, and they also tend to vote more. So, you know, you have all these kids that didn't like Trump or just, you know, reluctantly didn't like the guy and were going to vote for Biden, where normally they wouldn't spend 30 minutes getting up, driving to the polling booth and voting. Instead, they get mailed something in the mail and go, oh, okay, I can check a box and it's over with. So it did bring in all these new voters who, generally speaking, were always going to go vote left if they did vote, but normally wouldn't vote. Which, you know, I would say is something of an unfair advantage. There was no counterbalance on the right or anything. So, yeah, that was a big one. He also, this was back in 2005, started something called the Secretary of State Project. And this was sort of his first foray into local politics, because he was inspired to try to stop the whole Florida situation back with Bush versus Gore from happening again. So actually his first foray into local politics was trying to prevent you know, Republicans from correctly winning another election in that situation or scenario.
All right, so then since we're discussing young people, a lot of them are, of course, in college and the university, which has also received a lot of funding from the Open Society Foundation. Can you touch a bit about how the Open Society Foundation uses the George Soros money to influence higher education? Yeah,
so Soros actually has founded his own college. There's one, it was started in Hungary called Central European University back in, I believe it was the 80s. But it was really his first attempt at driving the narrative through a, I guess, more respectable format. One of the things you notice about the school is the faculty to student ratio is something like 3 to 1, you know, meaning 75% of people there are actually teachers or researchers. Normally it's like, you know, 10 students for every professor or even more. And I think it's just because most of they're really think tanks masquerading as universities. One of the things about Central European University too is it is a truly hideous building in the center of Budapest. Almost, people who've been there said it's almost like a middle finger to the rest of the beauty of the city. And I think that's deliberate. Now, it doesn't operate anymore because Viktor Orban, who ironically once got a Soros scholarship to be a law student, decided liberalism was not for him, went to the not far right, but more, you know, to the, I would say to the right of the average Republican, is not afraid to use state power to advance his goals, and launched a very big anti-Soros campaign in this country. There was billboards. If you walked into a bus, you'd be stepping on a photo of his face printed on the floor. That set the stage to really just turn the public against him, and then once the public was against him, he could start acting on it, and, you know, just basically effectively kicked him out of the country. So that was his flagship university. It's now in Vienna. There's about, I think, 20 or so that he funds very heavily that I have listed in the book. The one in America that he funds the most is called Bard College, which is partnered with Central European University. Now, the one, I guess, caveat is, you know, how is this different than every other crazy liberal university? And actually, it's really not that much different. I would just say it exists more to serve his specific agenda. But in terms of ideology, you look at the coursework, it's the craziest stuff you've ever read, but you could also go on, you know, Cornell's, and it's some wacky stuff there too. But he, you know, he's pouring more gasoline on the fire, and that is the insanity of higher education.
So it seems like in terms of higher education, it's not been such a big push, a big focus of the Open Society Foundation, you would say?
No, I can't think of any, or at least couldn't find any big studies that came out that were these huge policy-changing things. But he does have them out there. I mean, most academia doesn't really get elevated to a national level or anything, but he does have all these institutions that do promote his ideology.
I think recently more and more schools, especially under the college level, the kindergarten, middle school, high schools, have been getting some national publicity due to CRT as well as sort of this like sexualized education. Did you find any connections to George Soros or his money in any of that?
Not any of that, actually. I mean, it is sort of, I mean, the whole, I'm sure the Libs of TikTok account you're familiar with, they did a very good job at exposing that. That hasn't really been on my radar until currently. So I haven't found anything directly there, but I would not be surprised if activist groups that sort of share the ideology do it. But it does seem like, at least from the what Libs of TikTok is finding, is it's sort of individual actors who are, I guess, kind of crazies or eccentrics who are getting no pushback and probably should in any civilized society.
So besides all the DAs you mentioned and what they're doing, how much influence does George Soros have in the overall government, maybe at the state and national level?
I did a section on his influence in the Biden White House, and a lot of it is people like Neera Tanden and Ron Klain, two obviously higher ups in Biden advisors, work for the Soros-linked Center for American Progress, so there's some influence there. Obviously, Soros was a big donor to Obama, so he obviously sort of has some residual influence over Biden. And the Secretary of State is another, Antony Blinken is another big one. In fact, one of the first things he did after taking office was he sanctioned Albania's first non-communist president, Sali Berisha, who was a very prominent Soros critic. Soros tried to infiltrate his country. Berisha kind of realized what was going on and said no. So the two had a very bitter rivalry for quite a while. And then, the second, Blinken, who I should mention, his parents are donors to the Open Society Foundation. There was actually a library at the aforementioned Central European University named after him. And if you go through the Open Society Foundation's annual reports, both their names pop up there in the hierarchy. So Blinken's probably one of the big ones. And there's just been historical influence too. For instance, under Bill Clinton, Soros had a lot of influence in this sort of initiative to help Russia transition from communism to capitalism, where Soros more or less was able to sort of paint himself as this anti-communist hero, while his real goal was just buy up state assets for pennies on the dollar. And then there's also with the Hillary Clinton as well. In addition to Bill Clinton, I have a chapter in there where I have leaked Soros emails, and there are various ones with Clinton where he'll say hey, I think this guy would be the best person for this position, and then the next day in the news, what do you know, she appoints that person. So those are the ones that come to mind.
Oh, so then it seems like if that's the case, if he recommends someone the next day it happens, it seems like he has some deep ties.
Or one heck of a coincidence, but yeah, I think it's some direct influence there.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. And so when you said that the Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, he worked for a foundation that receives, you said, is linked to Soros, so they receive funding from the Open Society?
Yeah, Center for American Progress. It's a very big, they were actually a lot bigger a decade ago, but a very big lefty think tank. I think Neera Tanden might have even been on the board, but yeah, it receives a very large share of their funding from him. And
So in that scenario, how do you think that affects the decisions or his influence there? Do you just think it's like an ideological alignment, or more than that? What do you think?
Well, I mean, in your everyday life, 99% of the time, it's just we have this connection because we share the same ideology. But also, if there ever is anything that does involve Soros, I mean, they I don't know if they literally have the guy's phone number, but they the guy. He's funded you. You know him. He's a contact. In fact, and this is a little off topic, but there was a document. Actually, no, it's not off topic. It's a document leaked from him, the Open Society Foundation, and it was sort of like a dossier or like a Rolodex of all his contacts in the European Parliament. It was 277 people, which out of a parliament of 705 would mean that if you made Soros-backed MPs a political party, they'd be the biggest political party in the EU Parliament. And it just has all these facts in them. Contact, fax, cell, email, why we align, what issues we align on. And my first thought was, well, what does that look like for the U.S. government? And I'm sure that document must be somewhere. So, maybe that'll come out in the future. But if he's got, what is that? I mean, nearly more than a quarter of European Parliament in his arm. I imagine you'd see a very similar list for America.
Well, you said it'll likely come out, but even if it comes out, maybe we won't even see it because that's what happened in 2016.
Yeah, they'll say it's a Hunter Biden laptop thing. They'll just find some way to excuse to bury it or say it's fake or something, but we'll believe it.
Actually, so 4 years before the Hunter Biden laptop, that's what happened with the Soros documents, right? In 2016, they were leaked on that web. I forgot what the website's name.
Leaks or something. It sounded like WikiLeaks. I think it was like DC Leaks or something.
But then it got killed. No media reported on it.
The Daily Caller got it, and that was really it. No one else followed up.
Was there anything that was revealed in those leaks that you can share with us?
Oh, yeah, so I actually have a whole chapter on it. I mean, one of the things that I thought was the most interesting was just sort of the psychology of why they support organizations. So, like, there was one where their whole goal was to make it so Catholics would be more likely to vote Democrat. So they're like, what do we do? I mean, abortion's a huge issue for them. So they're just started on the strategy of reframing, where it's, all right, we need to infiltrate a Catholic organization. And I think it was actually like I can't remember if they openly were pro-life, but they infiltrated a Catholic organization, and we're trying to get it to repitch the goals to voters as like, well, abortion is one of many issues. So, hey, it might be the case that we're all pro-life, but if the Democrats are bigger on these other 4 issues, well, we got to vote Democrat. It was just interesting. This actually didn't make it into the book, but the Daily Caller reported on it. It was after the book came out. A right-wing environmentalist group that was funded by Soros. And well, why would Soros fund a Republican environmentalist group? Well, it's reframing. It's a Republican will go, well, I guess if you can, it's sort of taking advantage of this psychology where if you hear an idea that conflicts your ideology from someone who shares it, like if Tucker Carlson says pitches something that's maybe fiscally left of center, it's generally more well received by Republicans than if Obama said it. Sort of picking up off that, where they're hoping they can go, well, hey, if it's a Republican issue, then if it can be seen as a Republican issue too, then maybe people on the right will come along to our side. But really, we're just basically screwing with them psychologically. So that's just one thing I thought was sort of interesting. The EU Parliament leak was also very big. And then a lot of stuff is just these little tiny things that just kind of give insight into their operations and all that.
So we discussed his ideology. We discussed his foundation, how it's using quite literally billions of dollars and a replenishing source of billions of dollars, because he, of course, has his fund to fund all these different DAs, these different politicians, the media, and the actual people on the ground doing some of the violence. However, George Soros is 91 years old, and he looks it, right?
Yeah.
He's likely not going to be here for the next 10 years. I mean, I don't wish anything bad on anyone, but at the same time, you're 91. So the question is, how do you, based on your research, expect his ideology and what he set up to continue after he's gone?
Right, so I think it was actually decades ago, expressed concerns that foundations often stray from their founders. And he was initially reluctant to really keep the foundation going. However, in 2017, that $18 or $19 billion donation, given he was in his late 80s at the time, does signal that's what the point is. It's succession planning. It's to get into that balance sheet so it can continue. It seems like his son, Alexander, is going to be sort of taking the mantle. It seems like he's second in command right now. And I think it'll sort of be more of the same. It might just be what he focuses on is different, but he's more or less a clone of the father. There doesn't seem to be any, ideological difference or anything like that. Obviously his father may have more connections than he does currently, but if his son's at this for the next 50 years, I'm sure he'll be just as powerful, unfortunately.
And then the last question. So in terms of amassing his wealth, George Soros is famous for the man who broke the Bank of London, right? He played within the rules, within the boundary of the rules that existed. He took that to the extreme and pretty much almost crashed the entire economy of England. It seems like the same thing is playing out in the political sense here, at least here in America. He is funding all the different grassroots organizations on the ground. He's funding the media that reports on them. He's funding the actual DAs who are then releasing these people back into the streets. So it's like kind of a self-perpetuating circle. So it almost seems like he's playing the same game. He's playing within the rules, because you're allowed to use your money for whatever you want to use it for, to also break down society. That's what it seems like to me. What is the solution here? Hungary instituted those anti-George Soros laws. That's a bit, maybe, what's your opinion? That's a bit extreme, but what do you think is the solution?
Well, the First Amendment obviously prohibits that. But that was a very good analogy you gave. I wish I thought that up for the book. But yeah, so we are obviously handicapped in that regard. We can't do what, Russia or India have done and see his asses and kick them out. But I would just, my whole goal of the book is just have it be everyone, sort of demystify the man. Just have it, there are certain things where, if I want to prove a point to a liberal, I can't cite Fox News, even if it's 100% true, because they'll just go, oh, that's Fox News, that's BS. So I have to find, all right, where's a non-biased source that says the exact same thing? I want Soros' name to be the same thing, where the second someone hears a Soros-backed group is behind something, they go, oh, it's just Soros, it's crazy stuff. I just really think being as knowledgeable as possible about who he is and his influence, the kind of narratives he promotes and why they're completely false, I mean, just more awareness of who the guy is. You know, maybe an ad campaign would work, but yeah, obviously we're handicapped in directly thwarting his operations. Although, you know, they are, as I said, the least transparent charities. So perhaps there is, you know, an in for regulators to see maybe something's up here. But I haven't seen any evidence that there is.
Matt, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.